You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
Let me tell you how I kick off my mornings. A big glass of cold brew coffee. But before the caffeine fully hits, I need to know what's happening in the world. That's where Morning Brew comes in. Instead of scrolling endlessly through news sites, I get a newsletter that lands in my inbox with all the business, tech, and finance headlines I actually care about. No fluff, just facts. Think of it as a news aggregator, but curated by people who get what matters today. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just another email I'll ignore? But here's the twist. Each story is bite-sized, punchy, and linked out for a deeper dive. It's like the difference between sipping an espresso shot and dragging through a full pot. I've been using Morning Brew for several months, and one article grabbed me recently. The wild story of how El Salvador's Bitcoin experiment didn't just fizzle, nearly backfired on an entire country. That's the kind of global context you don't get from cable news. So, if you want to start your day smarter, check out morningbrewdaily.com, crowd, or hit the link below. And thanks again to Morning Brew for making this episode possible. Take a globe, trace the 38th parallel, and you'll land on a border that shaped modern history, the line slicing the Korean Peninsula in two. It's not just a geographic marker, it's a scar born out of the Cold War's zero-sum logic. After World War II, Korean, a Japanese colony, was split between Soviet and American administration. Two superpowers, two visions. Suddenly, what was meant to be temporary became permanent, as each side set up governments aligned with their own ideology. Picture a brewing conflict. 1950, North Korea invades the South. 3 years of brutal war, millions dead, cities obliterated, yet, at the end, the border barely budges. All that devastation just to return to a frozen standoff. Now, you might ask, why didn't things change after so much suffering? It's a haunting question. The answer lies in the ideological trench lines dug deeper than any physical border. This is the setup for a story of two Koreas, both reduced to rubble, but each forced to rebuild from scratch under radically different systems. Their fates, worlds apart. Imagine waking up in a city leveled by war homes flattened, infrastructure in shambles, millions displaced. That was both North and South Korea in 1953. Two societies, each picking through the ruins, faced with the same challenge. How do you rebuild from nothing? Here's where the experiment begins. Both started with similar resources, similar cultures, and the same devastated landscape. But their leaders made radically different choices. North Korea embraced central planning and isolation. South Korea, over time, opened to markets and democracy. Now, you might wonder, wasn't North Korea actually richer at one point? And you'd be right. In the 1960s, North Korea's heavy industry outpaced the South's. But over decades, state control stifled growth, while the South's mix of chaebol-stink Hyundai, Samsung and export-driven policies transformed it. Conflict emerges. North Korea's command economy breeds stagnation and famine. South Korea's embrace of innovation leads to technological booms, rising incomes, and a cultural renaissance. In the end, the contrast is staggering. One Korea becomes a global powerhouse, the other a cautionary tale. The lesson? Institutions and choices not genius-shape destinies. Let's paint the picture. In Seoul, skyscrapers glitter, K-pop blares from cafes, and citizens wield the latest smartphones. Meanwhile, just a few miles north, Pyongyang's boulevards are eerily empty, and most people struggle to find enough to eat. South Korea is a democracy, with property rights, freedom of speech, and some of the highest living standards in the world. The average South Korean today is among the best educated, and the country's culture Oscar-winning movies, innovative tech sets, global trends. Flip the script. In North Korea, there's no rule of law, only the dictator's decree. Famine is a recurring nightmare. Gulags dot the landscape, and the state keeps its people isolated with propaganda so intense it claims unicorns once roamed the land. Now you might be thinking, can it really be that extreme? Yes. North Koreans are, on average, 3 to 5 inches shorter than their southern cousins because of chronic malnutrition, a case of epigenetics, where the environment literally shapes biology. The divide isn't just economic. It's psychological, cultural, and physical, a living experiment in how systems, not ethnicity, determine human flourishing. Here's a big idea. The Korean Peninsula is the world's largest nature versus nurture experiment, with millions of participants and decades of data. Two populations, same roots, pulled apart by politics, not biology. North and South Koreans share language, history, and, up to 1,945, a common culture. Their DNA is virtually identical. So why are their life trajectories so radically different? Now, skeptics might say, but what about inherent differences? The evidence is overwhelming. It's the system, stupid. Economic policy, political freedoms, and education make or break societies. Here's a vivid example. Reunification defectors from the North often catch up to the South physically and intellectually after just a few years with access to food, education, and opportunity. This is the essence of nurture. Environments mold outcomes. The Korean case closes the book on racial determinism, showing that it's institutions and choices that shape human potential. Let me take you back to 1870s Italy, where Cesare Lombroso, a prison doctor, thought he'd found the biological roots of crime in skull dimples. He wasn't alone. His crackpot theories about Southern Italians being racially inferior caught fire in a Europe obsessed with phrenology and eugenics. Lombroso's idea, that centuries of conquest had tainted Southern Italians, making them, in his words, less civilized. The technical terms hereditivism and anthropometry are just fancy ways of dressing up prejudice as science. Now, you may ask, how did this nonsense shape policy? Northern Italians began to believe the South was hopelessly backward, so they left it to wrote a classic case of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's the twist. Faced with poverty and neglect, millions of Southern Italians emigrated to the Americas. In new environments, they thrived, shattering the myth of racial inferiority. The irony? Lombroso's own family, Jewish and once victimized by racist laws, suffered under the very pseudoscience he helped popularize. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of mistaking prejudice for biology. Let me tell you a story about the great Southern Italian migration. Between 1,880 and 1,920, up to 30 million Italians, mostly from the impoverished South, sailed to America, Brazil, and Argentina. Politicians in the North even encouraged Ethiopian to export what they saw as an inferior race. But here's where the narrative flips. In the United States, Southern Italians became business owners, athletes, artists, and even Supreme Court justices. The technical term here is social mobility, the ability to change one's status through opportunity. Now you might be thinking, did these immigrants really overcome prejudice? Absolutely. While they faced discrimination, given a chance, they proved as capable as anyone. Today, Italian Americans, descendants of those so-called inferior migrants, often outperform their northern cousins in education and income. That's nurture, not nature, in action. The cruel twist? The same pseudoscientific racism that drove them out of Italy was later wielded against Lombroso's own descendants during the Holocaust. History has a way of exposing the emptiness of racial theories. Let's dig into the roots of racial myths. Lombroso and others claim southern Italy's struggles stem from tainted blood due to North African conquest. But let's unpack that. What exactly made North Africans supposedly less civilized? Here's the contradiction. North African kingdoms of the Middle Ages were urban, literate, and organized, while much of Europe remained feudal. The technical term here is state capacity, the ability to govern and manage resources. Now, you might ask, who actually ruled southern Italy last? Not North Africans, but the Normanza group, often mythologized as racially superior. Yet, close analysis shows Norman feudalism, not genetics, laid the foundation for southern poverty. The real conflict? Historical institutions, not DNA, set regions on divergent paths. When structures change like after migration or reform do outcomes. So, next time someone brings up the old chestnut of racial inferiority, remember, history and social science consistently reveal it as myth, not fact. Let's turn to the Americas. Argentina is one of the most ethnically European countries in the world. Less than 2% of the population identifies as native or black. Yet, being white hasn't shielded Argentina from economic collapse, corruption, or political chaos. Now, compare that to Haiti, over 90% black, and often cited as the hemisphere's poorest nation. Some still try to link Haiti's struggles to race, but let's challenge that. The technical concepts here? Demographic transition and institutional resilience. Look at the Caribbean. The three richest states, Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts, and Nevisar, also overwhelmingly black. The common denominator isn't race, but the strength of institutions and the impact of colonial legacies. Now you may wonder, how can two countries with such different demographics have such different outcomes? The answer is simple yet profound. Race does not determine destiny. Policies, governance, and opportunity do. The evidence is clear. Societal success is built, not inherited through ancestry. Racial determinism crumbles when faced with the facts. Let's circle back to Korea. The real difference maker isn't genetics, it's institutions. The rules, the incentives, the way societies are organized. In South Korea, the rule of law, property rights, and open markets fueled an economic miracle. Contrast that with North Korea, where a command economy and unchecked dictatorship led to famine and oppression. Here's a technical term: path dependence, the idea that historical choices set societies on certain trajectories. Now, you might ask, could North Korea have been as successful as the South? Absolutely, if its institutions and leadership had chosen differently. The genetic lottery played no role in this outcome. Think about it. When North Koreans escape and settle in the South, their children thrive. It's the environment, not ethnicity, that unlocks potential. So, the next time you hear someone argue that race explains a nation's fate, remember Korea's living, breathing rebuttal to racial determinism. We've journeyed from the cold, divided fields of Korea to the bustling streets of Buenos Aires and the islands of the Caribbean. The thread tying it all together? The power of nurture of systems, choices, and opportunity to shape human lives. Now, you might be wondering, what can I do with this knowledge? Start by challenging stereotypes wherever you encounter them. Share these stories. History, science, and lived experience all point to the same truth. Institutions matter. Policy matters. The color of your skin? Not so much. This isn't just a moral lesson, it's the empirical reality borne out across continents and centuries. Let me leave you with this. Every time we break down myths about race, we open up new possibilities for understanding, empathy, and progress. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it, join the discussion on Discord, or support us on Patreon. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning.